individuals, we need to learn how to best adapt to the world we live in today. And, that starts with, again, being able to think more critically about what we experience, more critically about how we think, more critically about the role that emotions play in our lives. So really, in some ways, to increase our level of self-awareness.
Welcome back to the Max Out Show, where today I'm joined by Dr. Paul Napper, a peak performance psychologist that helps business leaders level up their game. He's the author of the phenomenal book, The Power of Agency, and that's exactly what we'll talk about today. How to conquer obstacles, make effective decisions, and live life on your terms. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Max, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
And I'm already super excited to have you. We had a fantastic pre-interview talk. And so to get us started, can you share for our listeners who've probably never heard of the term agency before, what that actually is and why it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. A perfect place to start. So agency is our capacity as human beings to take command of our lives. It is our ability to marshal all of the resources we have inside ourselves, to make good choices, and then to act on those choices. And as you just said a minute ago, create the kind of lives that we want to live. So, so agency is really our ability to basically be who we want to be in the world and create the kind of communities around ourselves and create the kind of lives we want to live.
Yeah, I love that. So what happens when people don't develop that agency actively in their lives? Like, what are some of the struggles that come from that then?
Yeah, great question. When people don't have a well-developed level of personal agency in their lives, they often feel stuck. They feel, thwarted. They feel powerless. And so when people feel a sense of diminished agency, what that often implies is that they're having a hard time making sense of the situation they find themselves in, and making decisions, the kind of decisions that can help them to move forward. And then a lot of times they're not taking action. So they're both stuck in assessing their situation, making the kinds of decisions they need to make, and taking action on those decisions. So, really, when we want to develop more agency, it's what do we need to do as people to more fully access what we have, all the resources we have inside ourselves, to help us with those three tasks, making sense of our situation, taking action on those decisions.
Yeah, for our listeners, it's really become obvious now that building that sense of agency is absolutely crucial in your life, especially in these times right now. And so before the interview, I share one of the most fascinating things about your work is this buffer mechanism, where in that sense that building agency actually buffers against anxiety and overwhelm and stress. So can you share a little bit of that research of how we can actually learn to buffer against these negative things that, especially right now during this COVID crisis, are affecting so many of us?
It's a really good question. And what we find today is that many people are struggling with anxiety. They're struggling with a sense of worry, some people with a sense of dread about the future, and a sense of there's so many big problems in the world, including COVID, that people can lose their sense of optimism and their sense of power. And so what you just mentioned about buffer is the idea that when we have full access to our personal agency, we actually have more resilience. So we have, a greater capacity to stay grounded and focused. And we also have this important ability to adapt. So as humans, we all need to learn and adapt in our lives, right? A big part of being a human being is we're constantly faced with new situations that require us to make sense of them and to make choices based on those situations. And the goal is for us to adapt in ways that are healthy, that promote high quality life, that create the kind of society we want to live in. And so this idea of when we focus on building agency inside ourselves, which is what our book is about, we actually solve the problem of, how do we adapt? How do we adapt? How do we best adapt to whatever life throws our way? So whatever type of crisis, small, large, in between, when we have higher levels of agency, we have more resiliency, as I just said, and we also have a better ability to adapt. And that is essential to us because at the end of the day, we're always needing to adapt. And as the world moves faster and faster, for a variety of reasons, we're being challenged to adapt, faster, to be able to adapt more readily to the changing situations we face. So that's where agency comes in. It's why agency becomes such an important consideration. And and the good news is we can build it. When we understand what agency is and why it matters, we can actually build greater agency in ourselves.
You know what I love about the book and your work really is like you lay out really step-by-step principles that tell people exactly what they need to do. So which actions you can take to do exactly that, to build more agency in our lives. And I would really love to start discussing the first one, which is controlling our stimuli. So can you share with us a little bit about how does stimuli and our environment, whether that is our phones, whether that is social media, whether it's movies, whether it's newspapers, whether it's the people around us, how do things affect our brain and why not taking care of that can oftentimes lead to depression or anxiety or overwhelm in our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. The very first principle of agency, in other words, what helps us to build greater agency in our lives we call control stimuli. And this has become an absolute essential in today's environment because we are bombarded with stimuli each and every day, each and every minute of every day. And if we simply allow that stimuli in to our brains in a completely unfiltered, unregulated way, we essentially give away our personal power to that information. And so what we want to do is we want to exercise a healthy amount of control over what we expose ourselves to in the way of stimuli. And, that is any type of stimuli. Largely today we have, primarily digital stimuli, right? All of us are on computers, we're on our mobile devices. We receive a ton of digital stimuli all the time. Our brains work best when they're not overwhelmed by too much stimuli. So that becomes the challenge. And so if we limit our exposure to high quality information and a good amount of it, it actually helps us to make sense of the world around ourselves and to make good decisions. If we overwhelm ourselves with too much information and also, poor quality information, information that's not based in fact and reality, we actually lose our capacity to effectively make sense of the situation we find ourselves in and make good choices. So this is why controlling stimuli is very important because, again, overwhelm is a significant problem in the world today. People feeling overwhelmed, and a lot of it, a significant portion of that, can be traced to people simply exposing themselves to unhealthy amounts of stimuli. And so when we learn how to control that, it's similar to taking in food, right? I mean, you know, if we eat way too much food, we're not going to feel good. Our bodies aren't going to function well. Our brains are not going to function well. Well, stimuli is very similar. It's actually the idea of taking in a healthy amount of stimuli and also good quality stimuli. So it's become much more important. Of course, we're all coming to realize this. Much more important to exercise some caution on what information we expose ourselves to. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and it masquerades as being accurate, reliable information, when in fact it is not. So we all have to develop the skill to determine, you know, what's reliable information and what is completely unreliable information.
Yeah, so when it comes to choosing the kind of information that we want to download into our brains, where they're sitting, is one of the most important and critical decisions we can make in our lives. So one thing you mentioned is like, is this actually accurate, right? I think that is one easy guidepost that we can follow. One thing I've been really fascinated by is like the simple idea of like cutting out negativity. Is that another thing that you personally practice or would recommend to people, is just cutting out things that even if they're accurate, they're just negative and therefore impact you?
Yes, good point. A lot of information that comes our way, a lot of stimuli that comes our way to influence us. It's designed to get us to do something, to buy something, to, you know, to vote in a particular way, to, you know, it's designed to get us to do something, which may or may not be in our best interest. So a lot of times information that comes in that's very emotionally laden, so it's information that comes with a high level of emotional stimuli. It's designed to stimulate your emotions, a lot of times in a negative way. You know, that is information to be more cautious about, because a lot of times, you know, when stimulation comes in that gets you riled up, that gets you you know, angry or upset, a lot of times that's information designed to manipulate rather than inform you. So it's best to, that's why we say in the book, it's very important in today's environment to understand the difference between a fact and a belief or an assumption or also an emotion. Because a lot of times the stimuli that comes our way that's merely designed to influence us, it, you know, comes packaged in, you know, with a lot of emotion around it. And again, often negative emotion, right? Because it's designed to get us, it's designed to stimulate our emotions, which actually interferes with our capacity to think clearly, and then obviously make a more rational choice. So that's become an issue. You know, you've got a lot of people exposing themselves to negative kinds of stories that get them very upset, and sometimes that short circuits their capacity to be more rational and logical.
Yeah, I think this is so vitally important, right? That when emotions rise, intelligence drops, right? It's like
right.
that.
It really does work that way. Yes, absolutely. It really does work that way. And, you know, when we understand that and actually work to protect ourselves from that, our agency goes up and our capacity to make better quality decisions goes up. And the problem is that other people who are designing these messages to influence us, they have figured this out, right? They're a step ahead of many of us. And so we need to make some adjustments ourselves personally, and not take in information that is unreliable, that is just designed to stimulate our emotions and cloud our thinking. We've actually gone so far at this point to say getting news from social media is a mistake. Yeah. Social media is not designed to be a reliable source of information and news. So if you're getting much of your news from social media, that's a place to start, because that is not, there are no real standards in social media whatsoever in terms of quality control of that information. So that's a place to start. Get your news from reliable sources, the best quality sources. Okay. So, for a lot of people, social media is an easy place to get their news because they're on social media, they're talking with their friends. But we're advising people that just use social media for what it's best at, and don't use it for what it's not good at.
Yeah, I think that's so vitally important. I see it really in the younger generations, especially. My sister just turned 18, and I've seen her sometimes and her friends come up with these crazy wild stories. It had nothing to do with reality because they'd seen it on like Snapchat or whatever, right? And it's like you've really got to like fact check, I think, sometimes, and like find out where that information comes from. But there's another thing here that I'd really like to discuss, which is so one thing is those external, like digital mainly stimuli. Another kind of stimuli that all of us have in our lives, we've had it throughout the entire history of humanity, is other people, and this idea of selecting or associating selectively really with people that actually fit in our tribe. So can you share maybe that Framingham heart study and how important the people in our lives really are in terms of affecting us?
Absolutely. So what you're talking about, Max, is the second principle of which is associating selectively. And this is probably the most important of all the 7 principles of agency. And it's really simple. It is essentially this. When you choose to have people around yourself in your life who are supportive, people who also you can learn from, people who will challenge you, but also again support you and be helpful to you, your level of agency increases. You carry forward a sense of optimism. You basically are more empowered to live the life you want to live. If you surround yourself with highly negative people who criticize you all the time, people who kind of tear you down, or even worse, people who are abusive, your level of agency will decline. And part of agency is physical health. Agency involves our mental health and our physical health. And the Framingham Heart Study, talks about the idea of, people around us influence our overall level of health. It affects our immunology, how well our immune system works. It affects our levels of stress. And it actually affects our cardiovascular health as well. So it's very important to be aware of the people in your life you choose to associate with. And this does not mean that when you have a relationship problem, a conflict or something arises, that you cut someone out of your life. That's not what associate selectively means. But it does mean paying attention to what people you have in your life and how they make you feel about yourself. And again, you want people who challenge you to learn. So it's not that I'm saying you want people who agree with you on everything. You clearly want people who also, you can learn from and can challenge you. But you do not want people who tear you down and make you feel badly about yourself all the time. That is not healthy.
Yeah, I love this so much, especially this idea, and it's really one of the most important ideas in my life, which is like people care about how you make them feel. At the end of the day, I think that is the #1 relationship building advice. If you can make the people around you, whether that is your family or your friends or your coworkers or just a random stranger in the street, if you can make them feel loved and appreciated, if you can make people happy, I think that is the greatest super skill in the world, to go and touch someone's heart and actually make them feel better about themselves. So absolutely love that. And
it's very important. It's what leaders do. I mean, leaders need to. The whole idea of leadership is to give the people around the leader higher levels of agency, because agency is what allows them to get things done and to make progress. And so whether you actually lead people in your work, whether you, simply influence other people around you, all of us in some way, shape, or form is a leader in our lives. And we want to be thinking about the impact we have on other people, and also consider the impact that they have on us, because it's really so important to a healthy level of personal agency.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And so I'm really curious, like for people listening to this right now that are leaders then, right? And they're listening to these principles and they really want to improve their team's sense of agency. What do you think would be the best ways to go about it? About really sort of getting them into those principles or habits and actions? What would be the thing, like the easiest go-to thing for a leader that really wants to boost their employees or their friends' sense of agency?
Well, one of the things we recommend in our book is we have a very brief, questionnaire at the very beginning of the book, and it's a way to take a mini self-assessment to see where you stand on the 7 principles of agency. So if you have decided that you'd like to build more agency in your life, a place to start is to take this short inventory. There's a sample of it on our website, which I can tell people about at the end, to take a snapshot of where you are. And you may see, what most people find is there are a few of the principles of agency that they're doing fairly well on, but there are usually a few that they're not doing so well on. And that can be a place to start. So you can jump into the book, you can jump right to the specific principle where you need to shore up your skills, and start reading about that one principle and learning how to put it into place in your life. So that's one way to look at the book. The other is, if you're a leader, is you can have people around you in your group, on your team, read the book and have a discussion group around, for each person on the team, which aspect of agency requires the most attention for each of them. What do they need to focus on to have higher levels of agency? Is it their access to their own intuition? Is it their capacity to position themselves to learn? Is it focusing more on their physical health? Is it focusing more on their capacity for critical thinking, through using logic and reasoning? So it varies from person to person, but so the most important thing is to understand that we as people, when we make decisions, this is probably one of the most important things we do in our lives. So we're all decision makers, and some decisions we make are small decisions; they don't matter so much. Some decisions are very decisions, and they matter greatly. What we say in the book is, for all of us as people, we are the sum total of all the decisions we make over the course of our lives. So to become a better decision maker is to have a higher level of agency. And to be a better decision maker, we need to understand that when we make decisions as human beings, we make decisions with our whole bodies. We don't just make decisions with our brains. So when our physical health is out of balance, our decision making often suffers as well. So there's a whole number of things, which is where the 7 principles come in, a whole number of things that influence our capacity to make good decisions. And so really, the final common pathway for agency is this idea of decision making, how we make decisions, how we use our intuition, how we use our analytical capabilities, together, weaving those together to make the best quality decisions. That becomes really one of the most important goals.
I'm so glad you mentioned this aspect of decision making and how so many different aspects, our conscious thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, sort of all align and come together to create these decisions in the end. And so to really, weave everything together in the end, I'd really love to talk a little bit about how emotions and beliefs and also our intuition all play a role in determining our decisions in life. So maybe to start with, can you share about a little bit about the biggest fallacies that people like sort of walk into when they think about beliefs? I think there's a really fundamental aspect of decision making in life, right? In terms of like what we choose to believe, and I really use that word in an active sense, I guess. What we choose to believe in life really has an impact on how we then go through our lives.
That's exactly right. You said that really well. So one of the principles of agency is called manage your emotions and your beliefs. And this is probably the densest chapter in the entire book. And for one simple reason. As human beings, we are primarily emotional creatures before we are thinking creatures. And so how we experience our emotions, how we make sense of those emotions, how we act on those emotions becomes a really important question for each of us in our lives. And similar to emotions, we have beliefs. And, so all of us have both emotions and beliefs. And for many people, they have not spent a lot of time thinking through how they experience their emotions, how they use their emotions, in terms of how they make decisions. And also people haven't given a lot of thought to their beliefs and where their beliefs came from, how to use their beliefs in the best possible way in their lives. And so this chapter, or this principle of agency, becomes really important. And so, you mentioned specifically beliefs. And why beliefs are so important is we all operate with beliefs. And we all operate with assumptions. Assumptions and beliefs are very similar in many ways. We gravitate toward beliefs as people because they help us navigate. They help us navigate through our lives, right? We have a belief, which is an understanding of how something works, right? How something is set up, and we just when we make that assumption, or we believe in that, it helps us more quickly make decisions to navigate our lives. The problem is that the world is always changing. We're always learning, hopefully, and we oftentimes don't pause and reflect on some of the beliefs we have and update those beliefs. So what we say in the book is our beliefs are meant to be temporary guides to help us navigate through our lives. Beliefs are not meant to be fixed things that never change. Now, we also talk about the very important difference between beliefs and values, because all of us, if we really thought long and hard about it, we could probably come up with a list of values that we all have, personal values. Say a list of 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Our values tend to stay more fixed. Those are sort of more unchanging things. Whereas our beliefs really are things we should be questioning at times in terms of their accuracy, and we should be updating. Sometimes it's a small tweak to the belief. Sometimes it's a radical redesign of the belief. So because when we operate with beliefs that are inaccurate, that are outdated, it oftentimes causes us problems, right? Because we're not dealing with reality. And so, one of the things about agency that's very important, which you understand, Max, I know, is it's important for us all to try to acknowledge what's real and what isn't real. And just because we believe something does not make it real.
Yes.
So, that's why it's very important for us at times to be tough on ourselves a little bit and examine some of the beliefs we hold and determine, is that belief really accurate? Does that belief really serve me well? Or do I need to update that belief with new, based on new information or something I've learned? And so we want to have a certain ease with the beliefs we hold and not hold onto them too rigidly. Because when we do, we become more rigid in our lives, and it prevents us from learning, it prevents us from growing, and ultimately, it lowers our personal agency.
I love that so much. And one of the things that I regularly try to remind myself of is that at the end of the day, my worldview is really dictated by these 3 pounds of gray mass up here that have never actually seen a day of light. And what that means to me, right, is like, at the end of the day, we're all just making this up, right? There is no direct thing that my brain is like going around and touching stuff and feeling stuff and seeing reality. It's always just what's coming through my senses, and then me creating some kind of mental representation of what I think is out there that's good enough so I don't bump into things, but not necessarily perfect. I think that is such an important reminder of what you're really saying here, is that all the beliefs that we may have since we've been a little kid may actually need time for a little updating, because they're not actually accurate and because they don't actually reflect the truth of the world and what's out there and what would actually serve us to get better. And so what can you suggest to people, they're thinking back and they're like, well, I might have a couple beliefs, but I'm not really sure. Like, how do people, first of all, find those limiting beliefs and then sort of learn to upgrade that system and sort of get their version 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0?
Well, that's a really great question. And one place to start is to ask, yourself, we'll go back to the 4th principle of agency, which is position yourself as a learner. And one of the more important places to start in terms of assessing, the beliefs that you operate with, is it involves, how you position yourself to learn in your life. So the question becomes, do I open myself to new learning? And if so, how do I do that? How do I learn in my life? Am I the kind of person who learns from reading a lot on my own and reflecting on that reading? Am I the kind of person who learns more by doing something? Or am I the kind of person who learns more from talking with other people? For many of us, it's a combination of those things, but some people gravitate to one over the other. We need to always be learning. It's so fundamental to agency. And so one place to start, as we start thinking about our beliefs, is, am I learning new things? And one of the ways that you can answer that question is to say, if I'm really learning, if I'm really being open to new learning, sometimes I'm going to be learning something that conflicts with a belief I hold. It doesn't ring true. It makes me upset because what I've just read or what I've just spoken to another person about is in conflict with what I think is true, what I believe to be true. And so, a place to start is to then, hit the pause button and reflect, well, is my belief, does my belief need to be updated? Is my belief outdated? Is it wrong? Is it, and so we need to be open to questioning that belief. And but the other thing, just to back up a little bit further, is sometimes we don't even know what we believe. And we actually recommend in the book, as an exercise, take 20 minutes or 30 minutes and just make a list, make a bulleted list of some of the things, some of the beliefs you hold that come to mind most readily. You probably can come up with a list of 5 or 6 things that are some of the core beliefs you operate with. If you really reflect, deeply enough, you can come up with a list of a few things. And then you can kind of start to challenge those beliefs and say, how do I know that's true? How do I know that's really accurate? how did I arrive at that belief? I mean, that's another level of questioning that you can engage in, is how did I get to that belief? Where did that come from? Did that come from, my own direct experience and learning? Did that belief come from, something somebody told me a long time ago? Where did that come from? And so anyway, the place to start with beliefs is simply to be more open to questioning yourself and acknowledging the fact that, we all do operate with certain beliefs. One of the things we say in the book is quoting an author of one of my favorite authors, Joan Didion, who writes simply this. Her quote is, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. What that means, it's a very short sentence. And what she means by that is that we think as humans in terms of stories. We develop a storyline, a story about ourselves, our lives. And a lot of times embedded in those stories will be a belief. And sometimes those stories are simply stories. They're not really fully accurate. They're so in some ways we want to ensure that the stories that we live by, that we tell ourselves, are more reality-based, that they're more accurate, and that they're not crazy. I mean, right now, of course, we live in a time of a lot of conspiracy theories. People are embracing, wild conspiracy theories, uncritically, and they really operate as if some of those things are objectively true. And, if you do too much of that, you could really get yourself into trouble if the stories you live by, the beliefs you live by, are wildly out of sync with reality. It can really lead you astray. So does that answer the question?
Yes, for sure. And this is such a great example, because I think conspiracy theories, the one thing that's great about them is they show how much conscious choice we can bring into this equation, how much we can consciously choose, hey, this is the thing I'm going to believe now. Now, for many of them, I'm sure it's an unconscious thing that happened, right? But it is nevertheless something new, an updated belief that we can create around the world that then completely changes our worldview. It completely changes the way we conduct our lives when we think about ourselves or our country or other people or the world. And so I think it is so important as a reminder that all of us have those beliefs, and they may not be just as crazy as some of those, but all of us have beliefs that are limiting us in some way. And so just reminding ourselves of that, and then going through this exercise that you just mentioned of really asking, where did that actually come from? Like from my mom or from my dad, or did I choose that? So vitally important.
Really, and you said something you said is, we want our beliefs to serve us well.
Yes.
When our beliefs are more in sync with what's real, they actually serve us well. They're good navigational guides. It's like the GPS you have, right? On your car or, in your mobile device. When that navigational guide is accurate, it really helps you. It helps you get to where you're going. Well, if that navigational guide is full of bad information that's not reality-based, you're gonna run into a lot of dead ends. You're gonna run into a lot of trouble because you're gonna find yourself in places that you don't want to be. And so this kind of leads to the final principle of agency, which is we call deliberate, then act. And deliberating and before you act is a reference to the whole idea of what juries do in a trial. Juries who sit on a trial and take in all the information, all the facts. They take in what the lawyers on both sides present in terms of their interpretation of what the facts mean. And then those juries have to go in and deliberate, meaning they have to try to think critically. What did I just hear? What facts were presented? you know, how do I put those facts together and prioritize those and determine what really happened? And so, and then obviously the goal is to arrive at a just decision. So for each of us as individuals, that applies. We need to be able to deliberate effectively in our lives before we take action. And this is particularly true on very important life decisions. It's less true on, you know, am I going to have asparagus for dinner tonight or broccoli? You know, that's a small decision. But for big life decisions, we need to learn how to effectively deliberate before we take action. And that brings in the whole idea of critical thinking. And one of the things we share in the book is that in order for us to effectively make decisions, the best decisions in our lives on important things, we need to learn how to think critically. And this is a skill. It's a learned skill. And because of the amount of information we are bombarded with today, each of us needs to learn this important skill, how to think more critically, because that is the way that we can really develop the greatest amount of agency in our lives by making the best quality decisions. So, you know, again, living in an information-rich environment requires each of us to learn how to think more critically. And the good news is there are courses on critical thinking now you can take. There are things you can read about it. It is a skill. Anyone can learn to become a good critical thinker, but it's something you need to learn how to do. It's not necessarily inborn in all of us. The capacity to do it is inborn, but the skill itself has to be developed.
Yes, that is such an important point that like we all have the ability to do it, but there's another skill set that we then need to develop and consistently hone in our lives, right? It takes practice, just like riding the bicycle or driving a car. We need to learn those mental skills of building agency, of making effective decisions, of choosing the right beliefs. And one thing I want to highlight here really is like in the book you talk about knowing the difference and distinguishing between, you know, facts, emotions, hopes, wishes, dreams, about all of these things that may play a role, and really getting clear on like what are actually the facts here, what are the emotions I'm feeling, what are the beliefs I have that may influence this, or what are maybe some just completely made up things that also subconsciously trigger and play into this whole thing. And I think understanding your own brain and learning to really study that and how those things affect you and your decision making is so vitally important there.
That's right. No, that you said that beautifully. You really did. It's acknowledging our own limitations. It's acknowledging that we sometimes can be influenced, you know, in ways through our emotions that may actually not serve us well. And it's also recognizing our vulnerabilities, you know, our vulnerabilities as people. And in the current environment, you know, it's a cliche to say it, but we do live in the information age. And living in the information age means we have a lot of information coming our way. And to effectively live in this information age, we have to learn how to make the best use of all that information. And as you said a minute ago, this is a skill, this is a learned skill. It's not necessarily, we're not necessarily born with it. We have to learn how to do that. And so, you know, this is why for us to have access to our full agency in creating, a life that is most meaningful to us as individuals, we need to learn how to best adapt to the world we live in today. And, you know, that starts with, again, being able to think more critically about what we experience, more critically about how we think, more critically about the role that emotions play in our lives. So really, in some ways, to increase our level of self-awareness, which, you know, is obviously a very important part of what you study, Max, in psychology. I mean, psychology is about how do we as humans, make sense of our world? How do we experience emotion? How do we think? How do we go about living a good life? So all of this stuff comes to bear on our level of agency.
Absolutely love that. Now, before we wrap it up here, for our listeners, you've shared dozens and dozens of great ideas today. If you had to boil it down to just one challenge for each one of our listeners to walk away from today and to start applying today, what would be that one action step or that one idea that you really want people to focus on?
Yeah, good question. There's so many things that I could share with all of you, and everyone's in a little bit of a different place with some of the stuff. But one thing that is very important overall to be aware of is our capacity to reflect as people is so vital to our level of agency. So we want to create the space in our lives to actually reflect on where we find ourselves, what matters to us, and where we want to take ourselves in our life. And if we have crowded out all of that sort of more quiet, reflective time by being, busy every minute of every day or experiencing stimuli every minute of every day, we're not going to be in a calm, grounded place. So create some space to reflect on where you find yourself. That's very important. And one way to do that is get outside. We are advising all of our clients these days on why it's so important to take ourselves into natural environments, because it promotes greater reflection. And it's incredibly restorative to all of us to be in natural settings. And I'll refer people, I know we need to stop soon, but refer people to some of the studies on forest bathing. That's right, it's called forest bathing, yes, which comes from Japan. And the research on the idea of simply walking through woods, the effects that have on mental health and also, surprisingly, on our immunology is really, there's some groundbreaking research on this. So increase the amount of reflective time in your life and take yourself to natural environments and move around, because that's the perfect place to reflect more on yourself, on where you find yourself and where you want to take yourself.
Thank you so much for mentioning this. This is forest bathing, this idea of just going out in nature, whether that is actually a forest or whether that's just the beach or the mountains. It's fundamentally changed my life. It's something I do every single day.
Really? Oh, that's great to hear.
There's nothing better. Yes, whether it's going out for a run or for a walk, every single morning I go out there.
Perfect. That's a big agency building thing right there. Yes. Simple thing to do, to build into your day-to-day life. That actually builds agency.
Yes, and really just from a personal experience for all of our listeners, just going out there in the morning before you check your phone, before you check your emails, before you check in with anybody else outside there, you just go and check in with yourself, right? And you build that agency actively by reflecting on your dreams and your goals and who you want to be that day. It's really a fundamental game changer, but maybe a topic for another day. So before we wrap it up here, can you share with our listeners, where can they find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. Check out our website, which is powerofagency.com. There's a lot of information on the website, both about agency, about speaking engagements we're giving. There's a brief mini test, one part of the test on agency on there. You can do a sample, and you can also buy the book there as well. So check us out there. There's a whole bunch of interviews that we've given. And there's some links on there as well. But, expose yourself to the idea of agency. It's really, again, I like to say to people, agency is the most important thing you may never have heard of.
I love that.
It's so fundamental to us as people. So anyways, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed this, Max.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate having you. Honestly, it was a fantastic time. All right, guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you gained some valuable ideas, tips, tools, tricks, mindsets, belief systems that will hopefully inspire you to take your life to the next level. At the end of the day, guys, it's all about application. The only thing that's going to set you apart tomorrow from where you are today is how much action you take with those ideas that you gained. And so I really want to challenge you at this point to, not just listen to this passively, to not just consume this, passively, just think about other things, but to really take those lessons, take those ideas that you just gained and start applying them to your lives, to really start taking action and sprinting towards those goals and those dreams that you have in your life. Now, guys, at this point, I want to ask you for a huge favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review, as that helps me really grow the show and reach more people, impact even more people around the world. If you have a family member, friend, a loved one maybe, that you think could benefit from this content, please consider, sharing it with them, forwarding to them, as that helps us really build a community of like-minded people that are all about maxing out their lives. Now, guys, with that being said, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really, really appreciate it. Stay strong and see you tomorrow.